Season's greetings, everyone. Welcome to, well, I guess not entirely welcome to, because it's been about 2 weeks, but welcome to October. Oh, this episode, like I did a few episodes back, kind of wanted to come on and just kind of touch base with everybody and just kind of give a little bit of background. Like one of the things I've noticed about myself, a lot of what Beyond the Well is, a lot of our focus is on the guests or on whoever comes on, whether it be a friend of mine, a colleague, or someone that I admire pretty extensively, pretty greatly. Which I just happened to finish doing one of those, which I'm very excited to start promoting and start putting the word out there for a couple weeks. Got something very special coming to you guys for the week of Halloween, more specifically October 29th. But I think kind of in preface to that, I wanted to give a little bit of a background on myself. I know, like I said, a lot of the focus of Beyond the Well and a lot of what I do here is I bring someone on and kind of talk about their, spiritual knowledge, their philosophical views, their interests, and use that sort of as a format to dig at a deeper truth. As I've said before multiple times, what Beyond the Well is and what it represents is a platform that I started up to basically centered around the archetype of being willing to sacrifice something for truth or for knowledge or for growth. Again, a call to the mythological story that Beyond the Well is, the name is based around where it came from. My own spiritual path has been something that has been. I'm only in my early 20s now. It's been very interesting thus far. And I think because I approach spirituality and philosophy the way that I do, I've attracted a certain sort of people, and I've made a certain class of friends in a certain social circle that I've built up around myself. It's been far from easy, but it's also been something that has been very fruitful, and I've had a lot of very valuable experiences from it. I know the last time I did an episode like this, it was a little bit shorter, which this one will likely be a little bit shorter just because, quite frankly, I can only sit here and talk about myself for so long. Although it would be very interesting to have someone come on and interview me. I think that'd be interesting. I think I might do a little bit better in that format and that style. And there are a number of things I'm considering doing just to expand Beyond the Wells content range beyond just simply doing podcasts every week, which I very much enjoy doing and I very much intend to continue doing because I find it to be very rewarding on a personal level. I love being able to pick someone's brain apart and kind of get behind what motivates their actions and, things of that sort. But for the time being, again, let's take a look at my spiritual path and hopefully someone can take something from this and take some inspiration or figure out how to not do things. Either way, it's a worthwhile pursuit for me. So I think if I really wanted to get down to the nitty gritty, I've mentioned it before. I grew up and started out in a Christian household, a pretty moderate household. They held conservative Christian values, but they weren't so overt as many other cases are. You hear people, horror stories essentially of people living at churches. That wasn't my family. That wasn't the environment that I grew up in. We certainly attended church and it was certainly a family function, but it wasn't something that was like the core of our lives. It wasn't that extreme, but it was extreme enough to cause me to have to sit there and analyze whether I truly believed any of this stuff from an early age. And I did for most of my childhood, of course. I didn't really have a whole lot of other options. I didn't really know where to go or what else to do besides believe in Jesus and believe in the core Christianity and basically the Roman Catholic, like Orthodox Christianity that we are familiar with as Americans, a very business oriented Christianity, which in fact is not true Christianity by my definition, but no need to get no true Scotsman on you guys. Anyways, around the time that I hit 12, 13, that was around the time when I started developing my own music taste. And my grandfather that I have is a metalhead, like classic rock too, thrown in there some psychedelic stuff. I listened to a lot of that stuff with him. Like he used to drive me to kindergarten and whatnot, and this old truck that he used to drive, and we used to be blowing the windows out on that thing, and it was a great time. Loved it. I have very fond memories of that period of my life. And that upbringing with AC/DC, Motley Crue, Molly Hatchet, Metallica, Megadeth, all these experiences and that I had with my grandfather, whether we were driving to the store, driving to school, on one of his other misadventures, of which there were many. A lot of these experiences informed the way that I approached music, but also how I approached the world in terms of like my philosophical viewpoints and my spiritual side of things as well. What really kicked off my journey into spirituality, well, primarily the occult at that time, um, was my discovery of Marilyn Manson. And Manson, to me, much as he was to people, younger folks in the 90s and even older ones too, even now, Manson's one of those figures who, as an entity, stands as the ultimate rebel, the person who takes in society's criticisms, religious dogma, and basically regurgitates it back to the viewer and says, "This is what you created. This is what you made me become." And I think I know I enjoyed that a lot. I really wanted not necessarily to rebel, although that is in fact what I wound up doing, but I loved the anarchist stance that someone like Manson took. And I would later find examples of this as well in folks like Gigi Allen, who is much more extreme. And of course, you have the black metal movement with Bathory, and then, of course, the whole incident in Norway with Mayhem and uh, well, most notably Euronymous and Varg A lot of these other characters who stood out as quote unquote rebels. But Manson was the first of those for me. I was immediately drawn to Manson's music, Manson's imagery, and I'm saying the band as a whole, not to discredit any of the other band members, most certainly. But I was drawn to that uh, very early on. I had been aware of Manson's music when I was younger, but when I started getting older and started having questions and inquiries of my own that I knew I wasn't being given answers to, and things I was even told to avoid, that was really what started it out for me. I remember shortly thereafter watching interviews, which I'm an interview junkie, since I kind of do it now anyway. Quick little coffee break there. Even though I myself conduct interviews, I like to view them more as conversations, even though at certain times they definitely can come across as being a little more stilted, a little more awkward. Any interviewer can attest, there are always those instances where an episode or a conversation, an interview for a magazine or a podcast or whatever doesn't quite go your way. We all have them. I've had plenty of them, but I am an interview junkie. I feel like, especially with characters like Manson and other occult figures that I became familiar with after that, I find that the interview does a very excellent job at putting you in touch with the person. I always know that for me, and specifically with music, if I get really into a band, I seek out interviews of the band. Not because I'm particularly interested in them, like as people, I end up becoming interested in them as people. But I initially want to seek out what their interpretation of their music is so I can approach it with this extra perspective. And I think that extra perspective allows you to feel a little more at home. You feel a little bit more inspired. You feel like you connect to the artist a little bit more under those circumstances. So because of those reasons, interview junkie. So I became obsessed with Marilyn Manson. I think that's a good way to put it. When I was like 12, 13. Obsessed with the band, obsessed with the figurehead that Manson was and is to a degree to this day. And I loved the rebellious imagery. I love the aesthetic of his stage show. I love the raw expression of emotion, the like what Manson used to do in stage antics and whatnot back in the day. Like he would smash bottles on the ground and slice himself up. And although I don't advocate that, most certainly, it was something that I'd never seen before. And it was something that very much left an impact on me and made me want to consider the other side a bit more. And I had already come to kind of a standstill with the spiritual system that I was brought up in. And I knew that I had questions that I needed to have answered, or at least I needed to ask those questions. And once I did, the more I did, and the more I started digging into the YouTube community, because YouTube was huge for me and still is. We started out with Manson, and then I gradually, from there, expanded a bit. My interest became larger and larger. I discovered Anton LaVey. And despite the fact I don't credit him for very much anymore, because, quite frankly, he didn't do very much. Um, Aside from package something like Satanism into a sexy little um, package, quite frankly, sexy product, and sell it back to you, and was sensational for the sake of being sensational. And at the end of the day, as Nicholas Schreck, one of my great influences, and still to this day, favorite teachers and writers and authors, magicians, however you want to label him or call him, musician even. He himself said that essentially what Anton LaVey can be credited as being is like the occult's L. Ron Hubbard. And Scientology is a whole different issue. I would love to have a friend of mine come on and we could talk about. I have some stories to tell about Scientology. I've been not involved as a member, but involved as a spectator. And being only about a half hour away from Los Angeles, there's a lot of stories to tell about. I've had some fun times with the Church of Scientology. Anyway, back to Manson. I discovered from Manson Anton LaVey because they had a friendship towards the end of LaVey's life. Manson writes in his autobiography, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell, which is a fantastic read for anybody who's interested. I recommend you go ahead and give that a look. He details the time that he was actually invited to the Black House for the first time. Nice little throat thing. Invited to the Black House for the first time and what that experience was like. And I was immediately drawn to the ambiance, that the way that Manson described walking into the Black House is very, again, aesthetic. The way that you view it, black walls, a tall barbed wire fenced gate, all these occult, mystical, esoteric artifacts and paintings and statues and various religious paraphernalia. And I was very attracted to the way that sounded. I really liked the idea of playing with the pageantries of the occult, even though at that time I didn't really have any knowledge of what that actually is or what the occult entails. I just knew that the package and the look of it was very sexy. And I wanted to, because of that appearance, I wanted to learn more about what this whole Satanism thing was all about. So a couple years go by, I do some more research on my own. The first time I actually read any of the Satanic Bible was I found a PDF of it on my old iPod Touch that I had when I was in like 8th grade, I think. And I downloaded a PDF of it and I read it that way for the first time. And from there, I basically categorized myself as a Satanist, even though it was really, I agreed with it then. And of course, I didn't understand the historical standpoint of it. I didn't really know that LaVey was bastardizing the same way Aleister Crowley did the terms left-hand path, that really he didn't have much of a spiritual system at all, any spiritual beliefs at all. And I just kind of stuck with the label because I enjoyed the aesthetic of it. I wanted to make of it what I could. And anybody who's aware of LaVey and Satanism is well aware that that's basically what that system is. It gives you a few toys, occult toys to play with. You can find that like the Enochian portion of the Satanic Bible, the latter end of the book, where you can read these incantations aloud and basically standardize and structure your own rituals and stuff around it. But it doesn't really offer you much else besides that. It's basically Might is Right, Ragnar Redbeard's philosophy thrown with a little bit of a dash, some social Darwinism sprinkles over that, and you get Satanism. And it wasn't really much of a fulfilling spiritual experience. I put air quotes up. It wasn't very fulfilling as a spiritual endeavor because there really isn't anything spiritual about it. The rituals are designed as a form of psychodrama, and there's really no calling out to anything other than the void or yourself or whatever, exercising positive or negative emotions out of your system so that you can think and live more clearly. That's basically it. That's the gist of Satanism as a whole. And eventually I outgrew that and wasn't, quite frankly, as bitter as I once was. I think a lot of bitterness is found in the satanic community, although I don't necessarily disagree with a lot of what's in that book and what that doctrine is. I outgrew the system and I knew that there was something more I wanted to gain, more knowledge and more experiences I wanted to have. So from there, it was kind of slow. I was, throughout most of my high school experiences, I took in all the interviews I could find, all the books that I could find that I could understand anyway at that age. And it was very gradual, very slow. After a number of years, I slowly began to, in a couple significant instances in which my religious views, my spiritual views were challenged. And as I got my later teens, was really starting to become legally an adult anyway, I started again after a number of personal experiences. I just started to gain an interest again in Christianity, the religious system that I was raised in. And I wanted to understand it on a bit more of a I wanted to gain my own personal opinion of it because at that time, like I mentioned previously, I was doing a lot of research on YouTube and was very plugged into the new atheism movement. And I was listening to, I listened to hundreds of debates and interviews and videos from people like the Amazing Atheist, Jacqueline Glenn. Who else? There's quite a few. Those are the two primary ones, especially TJ, the Amazing Atheist. I loved his work. The Drunken Peasants podcast, which was still a thing at that point, and of course the debates of Christopher Hitchens, William Lane Craig, Bill Nye, and Ken Ham. Sam Harris's work as well, Richard Dawkins. I was actually gifted a copy of The God Delusion and the Satanic Bible. Actually, like my first physical copy of the Satanic Bible was given to me on my 16th birthday, and The God Delusion as well by a former partner of mine at that time. And it was a period of time when I really started accelerating in my knowledge. I really started learning a lot. I had done a lot of very cursory research as far as the occult was concerned. I basically stopped at Satanism and traveled a little bit into the pagan elements of like Alsa True and heathenry and like your native European spirituality, and gained a little bit of an interest in Buddhism, but I didn't really learn much until later on. But the older I got, the more I would research into paganism and write my own rituals and read books and talk to people and try and build a little bit of a community around it. I would kind of peter off and lose interest. I kept coming back to Christianity though, because I had never really experienced it for myself. All I knew was that when I was a kid, I got sick of it, rebelled against it, and I was, of course, as a child, as most of us are, if you grow up in a church or a religious family, you go to camps, you go on trips, and I kind of lost myself in that a little bit, trying to fit this religious mold to please other people, which is never a reason you'd want to do or take up a spiritual path to please someone else. That kind of negates the whole purpose. You're not making your own choice at that point. And that wasn't necessarily forced on me. It was just something that I did to help relationships that were difficult, in a difficult position at the time. But I noticed that I strayed away from it and I didn't really want anything to do with it. But now that I had gotten a lot of that bitterness and anger about it out of my system through the Amazing Atheist videos, which are still excellent to this day, Jacqueline Glenn stuff, Mr. Repsion is another one. And I watched all these debates, and their arguments were convincing and made sense to me. And at this time, I was essentially an atheist. I didn't really have much of a belief in the divine at all. And I still struggle with that and wrestle with that to this day, because I do have my very, very, I mean, in my eyes, valid anyway, views on these sorts of things. So anyway, start getting an interest in Christianity again. I feel like I wanted to understand it from my perspective. So I would try here and there, read the Bible again, because I'd read a lot of it when I was younger, but now with like a little bit more experience, a little bit more mature, not a whole lot, but a little more mature. I wanted to analyze what this book was actually saying and what its spiritual truths actually were. So I went ahead and did that. Would read, would talk to religious people, would talk to Christians, would go on camps again, would go to church or whatever. And I just kept finding myself in this similar position to where, from a historical and analytical perspective, which is the way that I have to think about things and I have to pick things apart, I have to approach it from a verifiable standpoint. And that's not something that is very easy to do as far as spirituality is concerned. And I just kept losing footing. I did not care for the business structure that Christianity has, at least in America, the church structure. I didn't care for the very submissive and inherently, I would use the word abusive in some sense. I think that's mostly to do with humanity, but inherently negative, I think is a better word to put it. Inherently negative propositions that Christianity gives, and essentially stating that each and every one of us is born sick and you must take the cure from me, otherwise I will punish you for being born sick, despite the fact that I had nothing to do with you or you didn't choose it or whatever. I just didn't really care for the whole sales technique of Christianity. I like a lot of the morals and values, and I still do, and I still consider a figure like Jesus Christ to be very valuable. And although not historically verifiable in terms of like whether he actually lived or not, it's still an incredibly inspiring sage. But as far as the claims of Godhead and divinity, those things are a little harder to grab a hold of, especially being someone who has such a broad and vast interest in all things religion and spirituality and the taboos. And if you attend or are part of a Christian congregation, those things are frowned upon and even shunned. So naturally, I found myself at odds with people who, push forward that ideology that this is the one true thing and that no other things really even deserve to be looked into. Never cared for that too much. So after going back and forth with this, like Christianity's religious system, I eventually would revert back and kind of just float in the middle for a little while. Didn't really claim any titles or any labels. Whenever I would practice magic of any kind, I would always refer back to the pagan traditions. Primarily, I found those to be the most inspiring, and I still do. At this point, it kind of leads up to the present day, is kind of battling with my upbringing in the religious system that I was grown and raised with, and sort of being able to come to my own truths about the whole thing, because it's very difficult to unpackage sometimes. We're raised in a religious system, and a lot of that indoctrination, a lot of those views are instilled into you to such a aggressive degree that you don't really know just how deep they go until you're tested later on down the road and you realize like, oh wait, that's not even, do I really believe that, or is this something that I'm feeling because I was taught to feel it? At this point in my life, I claim nothing. I don't claim any certain system, but I am on the journey like everybody else. Everybody's putting it together, and a recent fascination of mine has been Gnostic Christianity, and as far as I'm concerned, this has been the most fruitful and most quote unquote true version of Christianity that I've come across. And actually get into that discussion with the very special guest that I will be debuting the episode. I'll be debuting the episode of on October 29th, and look forward to that as well. I talk about Gnostic Christianity just a bit, but I find it to be very inspiring and a very mystical approach to Christianity, which I always felt was kind of missing. Christianity as it stands can be difficult to quantify for someone like myself who has researched magic and philosophy and spirituality. Like, it's very disconnected, and I often lacked the spirituality. I couldn't see the spirituality in this spiritual system called Christianity, at least the way that the orthodoxy puts it forward. I always felt like there was something missing. There was nothing really all that mystical or, to me, interesting about practicing it in any kind of way. You study, you read the book, and you pray, and then you go to church. Then you just kind of do this whole thing over and over again. I just never really found that fulfilling. I even if the reasons for doing it were good ones, the practice of doing it was never all that inspiring to me. So at this point in time, those are my researches. No claims, no stakes, nothing to be clung to, just on my path, pursuing it. And this platform has been an excellent, I would say blessing, but I don't think that's entirely fitting because I created it. I made it with help, of course, but this platform has been incredible and is basically my wet dream as far as religious and philosophical study is concerned. Is the more you build up a little bit of an audience and the more people you're able to reach, and the more leeway you have, the more confident you become in reaching out to people who originally seemed like unapproachable, and actually having discussions with these people and getting to pick apart their brains and see what's going on. It's been incredibly fulfilling, and I very much look forward to continuing it, to continue doing the podcast, and to do more things like this. If you appreciate it, that'd be awesome. But if not, streaming is always an option. That's something I've kind of tossed up in the air a little bit, but the future is to be had. There's a lot of plans in the works, a lot of very exciting stuff coming up. And I think that's about it that I wanted to get off my chest for today. Got a very interesting and fascinating episode planned for next week. One of the things I'm very excited to get into, and you can anticipate our first female guest, which I know has been requested, and I'm very excited to welcome one on and gain some more insight into the feminine female perspective, which is something that I venerate a lot as a practitioner. So Thank you guys a whole lot. Whatever platform you're listening to this on, specifically with Apple Podcasts, go ahead and drop us a rating. Be honest, it's all good. Any rating is fine. Preferably 5 stars, though. That'd be awesome. But if you don't feel like I've earned it, whatever it is that you want to do, keep up to date with the Instagram page. And there is quite a bit more exciting news to come in the next few weeks. And I'm very excited to pick up steam and continue moving and traveling along this road with all of you. It's been very exciting, and I'm very excited to see where it goes from here. So thank you all so much, and you will be hearing from us next week. Have a good evening, everyone. Season's greetings once more.